SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the course An Introduction to Disability Studies. Today we are going to talk about identity and representation. Okay? So, before we get into identity and representation, let us go back and see what we discussed in the last lecture. In the last lecture, I was talking about staring and the body. So, the first point that I made is why we are going to look at staring. So, staring is very extremely significant phenomena, because it is not a very neutral act, it is very much political, it generates dominance, it leads to violence, and also it has a potentiality to create new narratives. We also looked at the book by Rosemary Garland Thompson, a book called Staring How We Look, where she has talked about the 4 different kind of responses that staring generates, right. So, we look at the physiological response, cultural response, so on and so forth, and the idea why we were looking at these responses is to see that what is staring all about, what it generates, what it works on, and why do we need to stare, and most importantly, when we are looking at this phenomena, we are also thinking about certain questions like who is a starer, who stares, why do we stare, what do we do when we stare, right. And also because we are creating a kind of inclusive society, or we want to create an inclusive society, and therefore, we were examining that staring as a phenomena, so that we can include people with disability or body marked with differences in our society. In addition to that, I also talked about certain examples that how it is more cultural, that possibility is this, that even a person who thinks or who is a starer or who thinks he will be never stared at, when he moves to the new culture, when he goes to the different societies, he is also being stared, because in that community he is a strange, right, strange. I also highlighted the very idea that staring is also positive and also negative. Positive in the sense when you are amazed by the beauty, and obviously, it is not like you keep talking about the beauty, but you are amazed by the beauty and you are talking good about it. You also want that kind of a structure, architecture in your hometown or in your cities. But at the same time, when you stare something, when you see it is a dirt, it is something, it is not welcoming, it is not something good, and then you produce a negative images about that, and also do not let that kind of a body or that kind of disfigurement, so called, into your society. That is also problematic. All right. So, these are what we were looking at, and the most importantly, why are we looking at these different discourses? Because disability studies is a very difficult and complex phenomena, right. It is a simple not talking about, like, generally, as I made this pretty clear in the first lecture, that people think that is more about people with disabilities, no, but no, this is more about different minority identities who are marginalized, who have never got space into the mainstream, and that is why I quoted Tobin Siebers in the lecture number 1, that every minority identities has to depend on disability studies, because disability studies voluminously speak about every other identities as well, right. So, I am sure that later on you will see, if you keep reading books, you will see that the kind of a connection it makes with different discourses, different minority identity, and different cultures. All right. So, which is why we are engaging with today in this lecture, we are going to talk about identity and representation. These are the two very, very loaded terms, right. In fact, I have talked about identity, but today I am going to talk more on first representation, and then talk about how identity is related with representation. Okay, let me speak about it in a very simple way so that you can quickly understand. When you think about representation, you think that something is represented by some artist, painter, movie makers, right? And you also assume that the author who has presented it or represented it, it is his actual understanding of that word or of that body or of that picture, right? This is how it is. We also think that representation is not reality, right? You are pretty aware that this is not what actually are, right? When you see movies or when you see photos on magazines, you think that, okay, so this is just understanding of an author or a movie maker or filmmaker, and that is how it has been represented, right? So, you make a very clear understanding that reality is different and representation is different. But my question starts from here, right? Why do we need to represent something? Why do we need to put something in a representational form? The idea behind is, when we are going to speak about representation, is that there are two nuanced ways to look at it. One, it is created the representational images so that other person can think that it is what real is. And second, if it fails to comply the reality, you doubt that reality is not real, but representation is more real than reality, right? Let me make it more simple, because obviously, it is a very difficult and complex discourse, because starting from Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, today Baudelaire, Baudrillard, Lyotard, they all are talking about representation, and that is why this philosopher is speaking, so that you can understand this is a very complex phenomena. Let me go back and take example from Orientalism. Why Edward Said, in a book called Crisis in Orientalism or Orientalism, arguing that we need to question the thinking produced by Orientalism. The very reason is that they are very uncomfortable, the post-colonial thinkers, the way the Orient has been represented. But suppose just a couple of minutes before we agreed on the consensus that it's okay, it has nothing to do with the reality, so why are we talking about it, right? They are questioning because they think that representation has potentiality to produce a kind of images or kind of a position it can take where reality can be doubted, where people may think that reality is not real as the representation is done, and that is why we are questioning this fellow, right. So, for example, when we look at the colonizing images, right, the colonizer producing about the colonized images, what happens over there? We see that the author or the person who is watching it, who is viewing it, according to his own understanding is producing that images, and there is a possibility that he may be biased, right. Let me give an example with the film studies that would make very clear. I am sure you watch a film, right. When you watch a film, you think that that is what the picture is all about, but don't you think for a second that it is always about the camera, where camera is focusing, what camera wants you to look at and what camera does not want you to look at. So, what it does is a very political act. Even the, like, if you are entering into the film studies, which I recommend you all must do film studies, then you will understand that in film studies it is all about a camera, and where does it come from, right. Sometimes you see that it is being zoomed, right. So, the moment it is being zoomed, which means to say that they want, filmmakers want your attention there, not somewhere else. So, here you see that you are being manipulated to see a particular image, right. And when you are being forced or you are being manipulated, there is also a politics. There is something you must not see, something you must not watch, something is not for you. Let me give you another example, right. Sometime there is a house is shown by filmmakers, but you see there is something in the dark and something in the very clear picture. Why something is in the dark? Is because they don't want you to see that. So, here you see the representation, right? It is all about the representation is a politics, where filmmakers, cameramen, or the people who are watching, they present the images the way they want, right. I am sure, let me give you a kind of a question here, not a kind of a question, a kind of a sample, so that you can understand this. You can hold on a video for a second, like when I propose this idea, and then you can watch it again. Go to meet 5 people, right? Go and meet 5 people and ask them to create an image of Taj Mahal, right? You will see that there are people who have not seen Taj Mahal, they have also created a kind of a same image, which was created by the person who has seen the Taj Mahal. Why is it so? How come they both come to the same idea? Is because that the images produced about the Taj Mahal is highly influenced, has manipulated your understanding, right. So, it is not possible that you can come up with a different idea, because you are not allowed to, you are forced to think in the same way, the way they want. So, that is why I always propose this idea, that when you are reading a book, when you are watching a film, when you are looking at certain images, think by your own understanding. There is a possibility that some images are produced, some images are given to you in a such a way that they are controlling your visual understanding, they are controlling your imagination, they are not letting you to think differently, but they are forcing you to think in that way, the way they want, right. And which is why, my dear students and friends, what happened if you look at the colonial images, right, and which is why Edward Said is questioning Orientalist images, because the very reason is, the very rationality behind is that they were all prejudices, they were all maximum biases. That is not what the true pictures are, right. That is never the same scene is. But the second question now come, is it possible that we can understand reality beyond representation? The answer is no. You cannot understand reality beyond representation. The reason is that it is nothing but everything is just a representation. The only politics we can do is that we can produce positive and good images, or objectively as we can, taking into all the factors into the consideration, show that obviously it is not possible that one person can remain very objective or unbiased, but it is also can be assumed or expected from researchers that they can be more objective as much as they can, right. And that is where representation politics ends, or let us say it starts or it ends in a such a way, right. So, this is why in today's lecture I am talking about representation, because why people with disabilities are discriminated or ignored or excluded or marginalized, because I am challenging you, I am giving you a task. You can stop the video and can come back and again and test my hypothesis, if not conclusion. Go and see 15-20 images that is speaking about people with disabilities. Go and see that or read about them. You will always see that what I was talking about in that lecture, stereotyping, that they are never being shown as empowered, they are never being shown as unsympathetic. In fact, every time you will see something pitiable, someone feeling bad about it, someone, this is not desirable, this is not expected, that should not happen. This is what you are going to watch again and again in every movies or in magazines or in narratives or in early literary books. Why is it so? Why is it so? Because one, the most of the time we have never seen, we have never thought about people with disability, and as an outsider speak about them without paying much attention to their concern or a problem. Second is that we are not objective in a sense that we never go and meet them and talk about it. I am not saying that If you are not disabled, you cannot speak about it. Absolutely not. As a researcher, you can, you will, you should. But the point is that, are you not going to take the narrative into the account? Are you not going to ask the questions? Are you not going to take the experiences? If not, then I am sorry to say you are being biased. There is a methodology given to every discipline, and through this we come to a research point. Okay? So, this is what is required to understand about the politics of representation in relation to disability. Now, the second question comes about the identity. All right? What is identity? First thing is that, see, there is a prerequisite understanding of certain things, but I am sure that you must have read the name of Ferdinand de Saussure, Course in General Linguistics, or let us say Jacques Derrida, who has written the book called Grammatology of Grammatology, Writing and Difference, Speech and Phenomena, so on and so forth. Right? If you see that, they all talk about it, how do you get identity, how your identity is being produced. There was a point of time when there was understanding that identity is static, right? But after the structuralism and post-structuralism, we came to understanding that no, that is not true. Is a fluid, it's dynamic, it fluctuates, it is reproduced, it is produced in everyday life. Why? Because we got to know and understand that the language, images, everything are slippery, right? It can never be static. It's not going to be in the same way as it was before, and that is why you see the very idea and understanding of any body or body marked by differences or any minority identity changes in every day in our lives, right? So, the idea is that identity is produced in a opposition to something, right? So, identity, like what is a disabled identity? How do you know what is disability identity? You get to know in opposition to able identity, because you have understood that there is something called ability. Imagine you say that I am a man. When you say I am a man, you are saying basically not I am a man, you are basically saying I am not a woman, right. So, imagine if there is no category called women. Imagine that there is no understanding of women as such. What does it mean I am a woman? It's stupid to say I am a man, right. It makes no sense. Let me give you another example that make it very clear to you. Suppose you say that I am wearing a red t-shirt, and if you are saying to a person who has absolutely no understanding of black, white, grey, blue, you are, then it makes no sense. Suppose there is a child sitting in your bed and you say that go and pick up that red shirt. What he will do? He will go, and if he has no sense of a color, he is going to pick up any kind of a shirt and will bring it to you. Then you will say, no, 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 I did not say that. I said not white, I said red. This is white, not red. And that is where you say you are not speaking about only a red color. Actually, you are talking about white, green, in opposition, in binary, in difference, right. So, that is how identity emerges. So, disability identity, if there is nothing called ability, if there is nothing called able body, there will not be any disabled body, right. As if there is no women in the world, there is nothing called a category or understanding of a man, right. So, when you say I am a man, you basically saying I am not a woman, right. So, this is what we understand so far. That is how identity starts with. Now, why are we discussing in disability studies the discourse of identity? We are discussing the discourse of identity in relation to disability studies because our job is to question the way disability identity is produced in binary to able bodies, right. So, this is what is a background and understanding which I am going to speak in this lecture, and is required to us for making this picture clear, right. So, let us look at the slide number 1 first. How does representation attach meaning to bodies? Let me think for a second about this question. What do I mean by this question? How does representation attach meaning to bodies? What do you mean by meaning? What do you mean by bodies? What do you mean by attaching meanings, right? Hold on for a second, you will understand in a better way. Let us say for example, when you see a body, right, imagine any random disfigured or diseased body that you see, right. Suppose you have never seen that body. Imagine in your like in your popular imagination that you have not met any disabled person so far, you have never read the stories, you have never read any book, you have never heard from anyone in your school days or in your college days about disability. It is very neutral to you, it is okay for you, you will not say something, you will not even understand, oh, what it is, okay. Maybe you will stare because you never saw that. But again, if you stare, then as I discussed in the last lecture, then there is a different response going to come in the picture. But for now, hold on for now, you have no idea, right. But suppose, for example, as a grown kids, educated, understood from our grandfather, grandmother, mother, sister, friends in schools, in colleges, we saw all these things. And now when you see disabled person walking and coming to your classrooms, you will say, and you will go and say, do you need any help? If you need any help, let me know, I am going to help you, obviously. So, being nice to you, you are offering an help. But why do not you ask the same question when other students enter? No, I am not saying you do not ask the question, but you understand what I mean by this. When a disabled student enter in your classroom, you ask, do you need any help? If yes, let me know, I will be there to help you out. Again, I am saying this being more considerate and nice, but I am asking this question, why do not you ask the same question this to someone? Maybe he does not need any help, maybe he is so much fine, he is comfortable, but this very idea that disabled people need help, where do you get this from? Where do you get this from? There is a possibility that you have never seen a disabled people, you have never met a disabled person, right? You have just seen, you have never met. But where do you get this response from? How do you know that someone as a disabled needs help? It because through the representation, through the stories, through the narratives, you realize that if a person is disabled, he is helpless, he needs help and he need us or be to help him or her out. Right. So, this is what I mean by that representation has attached meaning to the bodies, right. A particular kind of a body requires help, you get to know this by certain form of representation, right, and that is how you understand this, that is why you realize this, right. So, this is what I mean by that, how does representation attach meaning to bodies. I was also talking about eugenicist, I am sure that you can recall when I was talking about that lecture, what I was talking about that. Systematically it was produced that black people are not intellectual, they are racially inferior to the white. Obviously, thanks to other scientists and social thinkers that they started questioning that understanding, and now we do not have that same kind of image, but still today in most of the societies it is a prevalent, people think that the people who are black are racially inferior to the white people are superior to the white, to the black. Where does this understanding come from? This comes from through the representation, this comes from the circulation of those kind of a narrative where it was established that a kind of a person who look black or inferior intellectually, cognitively to the white people, right. So, this is why we today need to question that. That is why we need to problematize that. All right. Going to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next point. The significance assigned to exceptional bodies is not rooted in inherent physical shortcoming, but rather in social dynamics where one group gains validation through possessing esteemed physical traits. What is this talking about? It is talking about the social validation, right. It is talking about that there are certain form of a bodies, there are certain kind of a bodies, they are validated socially that they are more acceptable, they are more strong, right. And then because of physical shortcoming or because of impairment, they are constantly being realized or made realize to them that, oh, you have a problem, right? You still need a validation from us. What is a validation? Why do we need a social validation? Right? What does social validation do to us? Social validation promotes inclusion and exclusion. Right? What I mean by social validation? Social validation simply means that in a society there are certain forms of the bodies acceptable. Let me give you a very simple example and then I am sure that you will understand. Suppose you go to attend a marriage ceremony, right? There is a marriage ceremony, you are going to attend that. And suppose you wore a trouser and simple t-shirt and footwear and you entered into the marriage hall. Do you think people will think of you as you have come here to attend a marriage? No. Because society accepts a certain kind of a dress code when you are going to attend a marriage. It is not validated, socially not validated that you are going to attend that marriage. Suppose as a bridegroom, right? Suppose you are a, how do you identify that he or she is a bride or he or she is a bridegroom? How do you know that he is a bridegroom and she is a bride? You know this because of the dress code, even if you have not seen a person, even if you have no idea who or she is. You get to know this because in your mental image, you know the dress code of a bride or dress code of a bridegroom. And even in the people, in the crowd of 1,000 people, you can easily identify he is a bride or he is a she is a bride or he is a bridegroom. It's because social validation. People validates that if you are coming to this particular function, you are going to apply this particular dress code, you should look like this, should look like this, that is a quote. You should look like this. If you do not look like this, it is not acceptable. In fact, I tell you this, most of the time when I wear informal dresses and go, people objected. People said, no, you do not look like a teacher. I do not understand what do you mean by looking like a teacher. Like, I have a degree, I can teach, I know my subject quite well. What do I need then else? What they mean for social validation, this is academic validation, right? This is academic validation, getting a degree, knowing your subject, publishing papers, writing books, they are academic validation. Social validation simply means etiquette, behavior, your dress code. You should be more simple, polite, so on and so forth. You should wear a proper dress and then only you can enter into the classroom and people will respect you. Imagine, most of the time when a professor entered, people fail to acknowledge because the kind of a dress code he has does not look like, and then you think is a peon or someone else has entered. The problem is that social validation is important, and that is why I am talking about that how certain bodies need social validation to be accepted in a society. All right. So, I hope that I have made this point quite clear. All right. Moving to the next point, look at the slide please. This group sustains its dominance and self-perception by systematically imposing cultural or physical inferiority onto others. Representation serves to reinforce a standardized identity while constructing a narrative of bodily diversity that marginalizes those whose bodies or action diverge from the norm. The portrayal of disabled people within literature often reflects social perception more than actual lived experiences. This is what I am talking about, or I was saying that, right. Often reflect social perception than actual lived experiences. Paul Robinson observes disabled characters are often treated as a mere catalyst for plot development rather than fully realized subject. They typically occupy the periphery of narratives, depicted as simplistic figure or as exotic anomalies, whose physical conditions serve primarily as a points of intrigue or spectacle, promoting reaction from other characters or invoking rhetorical effects that draw upon prevalent cultural notion of disability. Right? So, this is what the argument I am making, is that representation is also related with the norms. So, if you do not comply with the representation, because as I was talking about that there is a representation of you already in the society and you going to comply with this. Right? Let us say for example, a child, a girl child is born. How does she know that she has to wear this to look a girl? Right? Because through the representation she already been made to feel that you are a girl, and then you have to comply with X, Y, Z given code and conduct in our societies. Now, the problem does not stop here, problem goes to one step ahead, and the problem is, what if you do not comply with that representation? What if you challenge that representation? Then it is going to take a recourse to the violence. You will be punished, you will not be allowed, you will be forced to leave the classrooms or society, because you are not complying with the representation. And that is why I was talking about societal perception is more important than actual lived experiences. What is actual lived experiences? Actual lived experiences is this, that when you are living your life, a particular kind of a person feel differently, experience. Let us say for example, if I am coming to the classrooms, I am more comfortable a kind of a dress which is more easy and full of comfort, right. But no, then what would happen? People will not pay respect to me, because they will say, oh, he does not look like a teacher. He does not look like a teacher, I will not get a respect. But suppose if I wear a suit, formal shoes, even if it is uncomfortable to me, even if it hinders my teaching activity, but it is fine, because social expectations. It is expected from you that you should look elegant. I am not saying that everyone who wears suit are uncomfortable, I am just talking about a general scenario. I am just talking about how things are in our society, right. So, the point is, and that is why Paul Robinson says that it is more like look at this this point, disabled characters are more often treated as a mere catalyst for plot development. In the representational images, what happens with the people with disabilities? They are projected, they are given the idea that you are here only just to help the plot, you are not important anymore, you are not an important character, even if I am including you, you are there so that plot can be developed. Let me ask you a question, you can again pause the video and go and think about it and then come back. You go and watch some videos or images, or let us say for example, certain films, right. You will see that introduction of a disabled character, if there are any, because most of the times now what is happening, the people with disabilities are not shown, as I said in the last class, because we do not want to see them, we do not like them, they challenge our visual understanding of society, where we do not want to see any dirt, disability as a dirt, right. And therefore, what we want, let us not include them. But suppose even if you see some disabled character are included, how do you see that? How do you look at it, right? They are there so that only plot can be developed. The one very important example that I give to my student is, let us say Lady Macbeth, right, where Lady Macbeth is nothing but a kind of a helper who develops the plot, nothing else. She is not extremely significant character, however people think, but it is like they want to project like the catharsis, hamartia and all that technique, which Shakespeare wanted to recreate in a tragedy, and that is why they included, and all the faults can be replaced, like all can be given to Lady Macbeth, and that is why Lady Macbeth is there. But let us not get into the literary text. But what I am saying that you go and watch a movie, and in a movie you will see that they are just there so that plot can be developed. They are only meant to be ridiculed, and that is why, dear friends, if you ridicule and make fun, there was a time, not today, it was very much acceptable, it was fine, right? Disabled people being ridiculed went unquestioned, as if it's normal. What's wrong with it? It happens, right? But it's something that is routinized, something that is normalized has to be questioned, because violence, regular violence being perpetrated on a particular form of a body is not acceptable. Violence is not acceptable at all. But the point is that it is acceptable because it has been part of our everyday life, and we think that it's so cool, it's so normal, there is nothing wrong about it, right. So, that is why Paul Robinson is talking about that they are there just for a plot development, nothing else. Okay. Let us go to the next slide, please. Notably, protagonists rarely possess physical disabilities, further reinforcing the marginalization of disabled identities in literary representation. While mainstream critics have extensively analyzed characters like Twain's Jim in relation to racial themes, disabled characters often receive less political scrutiny from literary critics, right. What I mean to say is this, like that you will see that most of the time literary critics ignore disabled character, right. If they see there is a disabled character in the literature, they are often ignored, right. However, after the disability studies emerged, people started taking into the account, people started talking about it, but to a large extent, right, to the large extent they were never included as a part of literary scrutiny, right, because they never catch our attention. And second point is also important. I have so far very rarest of the rare, I see ever a protagonist who is disabled, right, because the point is this, that they are just there to serve a metaphor. And second point is also very important, that most of the time they are just there to help, but rather being part of political scrutiny. And that is why you remember the first lecture that I took of disability studies, the title Introduction, the first lecture, I told that disability discussion, if there is a possibility that it is part of a civic culture, but not any, like it was not a part of academic culture. But after the intervention of disability movements and disability studies, now people have started taking that discourse seriously. Okay? So, keep in the mind before I move to the next point. Look at the next point, please. Instead, they are frequently interpreted metaphorically or aesthetically, examined within the framework of sentimentalism, romanticism, Gothic or grotesque traditions, often without a heightened political awareness. The discrepancy between attributed identity of disabled and the lived experience of people with disabilities highlights how the concept of otherness is constructed through positioning, interpretation and assigning meaning to bodies. Representation in literature plays a crucial role in shaping cultural identities and categories, which Alfred Schutz referred to as recipes used to collectively organize experiences and standardize our understanding of the world. So, literary convention further filter experiences that have already been influenced by the broader cultural context, including literature itself, right. So, this slide, what is the point this slide is making, that most of the time either they are a Gothic, which means horror, right? You don't want to see that. They are created like a monster, as if they are there to horrifying this, or a kind of sentimentalism, right? They are represented so that they can catch your sentiments, attention, emotion, pity for them, right? So, not as a protagonist, as a political awareness you get it, but more than that you like creating a kind of emotions for that, right. But my question is this, but does that mean we should leave it untouched? The answer is no. If you leave it untouched, it will keep proceeding like this, as it was the case always. But the moment you intervene, the moment you interfere, there is a possibility that the political awareness can be generated. We can form a new image, we can form a new understanding, right. So, the point what I am making is that by critiquing, by questioning these representation, new representation can be generated. New representation which is not concerning like projecting them as a Gothic or inviting your emotions, but more as they are, right. It is like experiencing a new way to look at disability. Our job is to question that older experience of disability and forming a new experience of disability. That is a transformation we are talking about. We are talking about the new political awareness, creating a kind of a consciousness in our thinking, in our being. Okay? So, let us move to the next slide, please. If we acknowledge the idea that fiction reflects reality to some extent, we acknowledge its potential to influence our perception of the world, especially in areas where direct acknowledgement may be lacking. Due to the strong stigmas, I have already discussed this in the previous lecture, that how previous lecture means there was a lecture dedicated to stereotypes and stigma, right. So, we have talked about what stigma is, how dehumanizing, how deteriorating, how challenging it is. So, due to strong stigma surrounding disability and the limited availability of diverse narratives, the use of metaphors in literature often distorts or oversimplifies the experience of real individuals with disabilities or those of others. Their representation of disability in literature carries a rhetorical impact rooted in social dynamics between individuals occupying the normative position and those assigned the disabled identity. So, throughout various literary genres, from folk tales and classical myths to modern and postmodern narratives, the disabled body is consistently depicted as a spectacle, often presented through a mediating narrative voice. Disabled characters typically find themselves engulfed by the otherness associated with their disabilities within the text. So, the portrayal of corporeal otherness inherently emphasizes the difference between disabled character and ostensibly normative readers, right. So, the point what I am making is that when they are being projected, when they are coming before us, there are normative readers, right, and those normative readers have a separate and new way to think about people with disabilities. And the idea of the normative reader is that they always presume that only able body has right to exist, only able body can be promoted, only able body are allowed to be part of mainstream culture, right. So, these normative readers, when they see these disabled bodies or let us say diverse narratives talking about disabled bodies, they project or they create a different understanding about it, and they speak very differently about it. And that is why most of the time disability has been represented as a metaphor. What do I mean by metaphor? Suppose you want to show someone as a weak, you want to talk about some immorality, you want to talk about something unacceptable behavior, you want to talk about something evil, something ill, that exist in our society, then what will you do? You project disability, right? And then you say these are kind of things, these are kind of a body, these are kind of a people, we do not need it. So, all the negative projections are associated with people with disabilities, right. Let us say for example, you want to see something helpless, right, or more than that, if you want to show that how good, I am sure that, let me give an example, right. Let me give an example. I am sure that you must have watched a movie called Gajani. In that movie Gajani, what happens is there is a scene where there are certain disabled children or want to go somewhere, but the actor, I mean actress, she is watching and suddenly she realizes that they need help because they are not able to cross, and then what happens, she goes over there and help all the children to pass that barricade and can reach to their park or wherever they are going safely. And the actor, the main actor Amir Khan, is watching this role of Ashin, and then suddenly he feels, oh, she is so good, she is so sympathetic, she is so nice lady. And so, here you see it is not about those disabled children, the attention is not being paid that they are not able to cross because of the environmental barriers. The director or the filmmaker is not want to show us that there are this kind of environmental barrier which every day hinder disabled people to access these structures. This is not the motive, this is not the objective. Then what is the objective? The objective is to show how good that lady actor is, how nice she is, how sympathetic her character is. So, here you see this is a perfect example just to show you that how a person has shown a good human being by projecting disability, not for the sake of disability, but for the to serve the purpose of movie. That is what I was saying, that it is always there to promote that. That is what I was talking about, that they are always used as a metaphor, right. I can go on and give you multiple examples to make this point, but my contestation and my concern is, as a student, as a friend, your job is to go and watch more movies like this, read more narratives, literary narratives I am talking about, political narratives, cultural narratives, folks like this, and understand that how this is very much part of our everyday phenomena, where they are just there so that they can serve the purpose for others. They are not there so that people can think about them, the barriers of the society. No, they are there so that you can fulfill your purposes, right, so that it can serve your purpose. So, this is point I am making. So, therefore, you are not supposed to only limit yourself to only film narratives. I am just giving you an example so that you can easily relate it. I am asking you to go to watch read a folk narratives. I am asking you to go to cultural narratives. I am asking you to go and read literary narratives. In fact, there are many Hindi text, there are many English text available, like I talked about the like Jim, and Mark Twain is talking about it, but it never paid, like literary critics never paid attention to those literary texts. Why is it so? Why is it so that there is a gap? Why is it so that there is a sense of loss in our academic culture when it comes to talking about people with disabilities or body marked with differences? So, these are the discourses that we need to grapple with. These are the ideas that we need to catch with, so that we can better understand what is happening today, right. So, let us move to the next slide now. While these representation may reference real social dynamics, they do not fully replicate them in a mimetic sense. Characters are consequently depicted with a limited number of defining traits, creating an illusion of reality that falls short of capturing the intricate, multifaceted, uninterpreted context in which real people exist. Similar to freak shows, textual description of disabled characters are excessively determined, imbuing their traits, qualities and behavior with significant rhetorical power by selectively omitting and thereby erasing other factors or traits that could mitigate or complicate their portrayals. Disability are reduced to mere visual differences that convey a specific meaning. As a result, literary texts often depict disabled characters as freaks, devoid of normalizing context and defined solely by single stigmatizing traits. The relationship between text and reality is inherently imprecise. That is a point. Imprecise, as representation relies on cultural assumptions to fill in gaps. Individuals construct interpretive frameworks to make sense of their worlds, forming perceptual categories that can solidify into stereotypes or caricatures when widely shared and culturally ingrained. Right? So, the point what I am making, my dear friends and students, is that there is a gap, the actual real people that they exist, because and the representation, because we have not taken their narratives into the account. We have never paid their understanding and experiences. We have never paid that attention to their understanding, and that is a gap we are supposed to fill that up. Right? Because the moment you take into account their lived experiences, their understanding, their narratives, representation is going to be very different. But the problem is, why do not we do that? Why do not we include that? We do not include that because there is a possibility that they may not serve the purpose. We do not include that because they may challenge something which we are not ready for, and which is why we only accept which we want, which we think, let us include only this much part so that we can push this much. That is possibly wrong. As a literature student, as a social and cultural thinker, as a person who is concerned about inclusion, as a person who wants to promote inclusivity and political awareness, we are supposed to take a holistic understanding of people with disability. We should include the experiences so that we can talk more about it, we can include it, we can understand it. Okay, so let us look at the slide, please. Aristotle suggests in the Poetics, literary representation often prioritizes probability, what is perceived accurate over strict adherence to reality. The disparity between representation and life inevitably gives rise to caricatures and stereotypical portrayals that prioritize gesture over complexity. Stereotypes in real life becomes tropes in textual representation, as described by Mariana Targonic in her analysis in the trope of the primitive. Such portrayals, shaped by cultural stereotypes, invokes and perpetuate those stereotypes. Disability as a highly stigmatized characteristics gain rhetorical power from the diverse responses elicited from readers who perceive themselves as normative. The more a literary portrayal aligns with social stereotypes, the more potent and concentrated its effect becomes. Representation thus amplifies pre-existing physical differences. And therefore, moving next, within the Western tradition, the visual world is often regarded as a reflection of a coherent and just invisible world, encouraging the interpretation of the material body as a sign imbued with transcendent meaning. Okay. So, the point what I am making, my dear friends, is that it is not only about physical differences, because most of the time we generally think that the entire discourse is because someone looked different from us, but that is not true. That is a very naive way of thinking. Even the very, because everyone, if you see that, we all are physically different from each other, we are not the same. But the problem happens when systematically something is produced as physically different. Don't you see that? So, what I am talking about is that entire politics is not just about something being physically different from others, but the politics is about the very discourse of representation which it does, right. Look at the next slide, please. In literature, visual differences are often imbued with significance that oversimplifies and obscures the complexity of those that represent. In literary representation, disability is often depicted devoid of normalizing context, leading to static interaction between disabled character and normative reader, contrasting with the dynamic nature of real social relation, right. So, these are the autobiographical text that you can see and understand, right. Like I have just given you example of different text, so that you can relate what I am talking about, right. But the point what I am making here is this: when one person has a visual disability, it often dominates and distorts the perception reaction of the non-disabled individuals. This can lead to strained interaction, as the non-disabled person may experience a range of emotion, fear, pity, fascination, repulsion, surprise that defies conventional expression. So, non-disabled people often struggle with how to act or respond appropriately toward a disabled person, unsure whether to offer assistance, acknowledge the disability, or navigate the use of language and gesture. So, that is why, my dear students and friends, we are supposed to question the kind of stereotypical representation, and we should promote inclusivity by taking into the account of lived experiences of people with disabilities. All right. So, thank you so much for listening to me. Next, I will talk more on it, on different issues. All right. So, please pay attention to that, read more rigorously on it. Thank you so much. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.